Good morning. I'm here today with world-renowned environmentalist Gareth Patterson from South Africa. Good morning, Gareth.
Good morning, Denise. How are you?
Very good. I'm so happy that you agreed to our talk today so that we'll be able to share some inspirational strategies to best help us navigate our way through this pandemic that we're all experiencing around the world.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for inviting me.
So let's begin by a little bit of your background. You grew up in Africa, in
hmm
Nigeria, later Malawi. You worked as a game ranger. After publishing several books, you worked with George Adamson of
That's right.
Boy fame. And when George was killed by poachers, you ended up rehabilitating 3 of his lion cubs back to the wild in Botswana.
Yep, that's it.
And from that experience, you wrote 2 books, Last of the Free and With My Soul Amongst Lions. Very touching books. You also worked very hard to advocate against the canned lion industry in Southern Africa.
Yeah.
Also worked very hard in 1998 to bring world attention to the horrific treatment of the young Tule elephants that were being relocated from Botswana.
That's correct, yeah.
So through most of your career, you worked with lions, but you then moved to Knysna and changed your focus to elephants.
Yeah.
And from that, you wrote the book, The Secret Elephants.
Yeah.
And then in 2006, for all of the work that you've been doing throughout your life, you were recognized in South Africa as Environmentalist of the Year, and that's quite an honor.
It was indeed.
So over the years, you've written 12 books, and your last book just came out in January, Beyond the Secret Elephants, and you've already gotten great reviews on that. But the focus of our talk today is actually about a book that you published in 2001. The book's called To Walk with Lions, and I have a copy of it here. And it's the 7 principles of true spiritual fulfillment that come from living with the King of Animals. And in rereading this book, it's very clear that there are a lot of lessons that we can apply now with what we're experiencing in the pandemic. You are no stranger to trauma. In the past, you've experienced one of your lions who you considered a son being shot by a trophy hunter. You also had to endure having another of your beloved lions shot because she was accused of unjustly of killing a person.
Yeah.
You've received many, many death threats over the years because of your work advocating against the canned lion industry and also with the Tule elephants. You've experienced a health scare where you were given 3 months to live.
Yes, the doctors were rather pessimistic in hindsight, on that one. That was 14 years ago.
And fortunately, you're well and with us today.
Yes.
So over the years, you and many of us have experienced trauma. And in fact, it's quite a high percentage. And right now, many of us are having our lives disrupted because of the pandemic. People are experiencing depression, anxiety, loneliness, loss of purpose. They feel socially isolated. They don't have a community. They've been removed from their religious support. Many people are also experiencing economic stress. But you have some guidance for us. You have come up with 7 precepts inspired by the lions that you feel could help us not only with issues that we've been dealing with in the past, but also the current crisis. So could you share with us what these 7 precepts are?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting process. As you rightly said, I mean, I wrote this book close on 19 years ago. And what was reflecting then to me, you know, going through my own trauma and all the rest of it, and also looking through you know, at the world through the eyes of lions, because when I was living with lions in the wilds, when I was rehabilitating them back into the wilds, these 3 famous Adamson lions that I inherited, if you want to call it that, from the late great George Adamson, the grand old lion man of Africa, after he was tragically murdered by ivory poachers. After spending so much time with them, I was spending between 8 and 12 hours a day, every day, with the lions in the wilds, and I was spending far more time with them, with their kind, than my own kind. So I was very much living as a, you know, you can call me a human member of the pride, but I was part of the pride. I was like a mother and father figure for them. Lions have a very long childhood. This is something very important. They, you know, can take for up to 18 months or more before they are really prolific at hunting and establishing territory and all that sort of thing. So I was very much living, you know, in the world of the lion and seeing the world through their eyes. And there's certain attributes that I saw, not only in the life of my lions and my experiences with them, but just with lions generally, because I studied lions in the wilds back in the early 80s and then right the way through. So I've always been someone observing the behavior of lions and seeing interesting parallels with humans. Lions are social animals, and so are we. They're very tactile animals. If my lions were laying down in the bush, laying down on the ground, relaxing, or in the shade of the tree during the heat of the day or whatever, very interesting, because one would be lying touched with the paw on the other, and the other one would be touching, or the foot of one would be touching the other, or the tail of the other. So there's always this connection between them, and it's a very close-knit society. When the lions would greet me or greet each other, there was a lot of contact, and I learned not to pull back, because that contact is always reinforcing the social bonds. Now, today, with the pandemic situation, what we find ourselves is that we find ourselves perhaps even more feeling feelings of great loneliness, spiritual loneliness, general loneliness, and also a lack of purpose. And this is exacerbated by the fact of no social contact that we can have, and the social distancing. So this really does, as us as a social being, put us in an emotional dilemma. And that's where I feel that, you know, that we've got to overall look at the 7 principles that I described in this book to walk with lions. And I just run through very briefly what they are. And if people can just think about what I'm saying in terms of these 3 precepts, and what it means to them in their daily lives. You know, I'm talking about 7 precepts, principles of the lions, but think about it in your own life as well, not necessarily through the life of lions. These are principles that apply to all of us, and that is self-reliance, fellowship, willingness to care, affection. Affection is really love by another name. Determination, courage, and the last one being loyalty. And to talk about all of those, you really do need to read the book. And what I do is like separate little sections in the book, whereupon I actually give very, very inspiring examples of the precepts, be it self-reliance or fellowship or whatever it is, of what I've witnessed with lions. And at the end of each section of the precept, there's a simple meditation which takes you there to imbue yourself with that inspiring, with that inspiration of the line of that particular precept. Now, it's actually a very gentle process, and I believe that it can apply to everyone. And people can say to me, "But Gareth, I live on how many stories up on a tall building or whatever it might be, skyscrapers or whatever. I feel so connected to the earth." And I said, "But everyone is connected. It doesn't matter where you are on earth. Wherever you live, wherever you work, you're actually connected to the earth, because everything is connected to the earth. The buildings, whatever, is connected to the earth. If you can't get into a park to do a meditation from the 7 principles of the light, you can do it in your own home. You can just still yourself. And that's the whole thing. And I think sometimes we need to wake ourselves up to the fact that we are very much part of the greater whole. We mustn't think of ourselves as separate from nature. And I think what the pandemic has actually done, ironically, is made people realize that we are not separate from the rest of nature. We are just one species, and one species, just like any other species on Earth, is very susceptible to what could come round the corner, and we don't know where it's coming from, that something can specifically hit our species. So on another way of looking at it, very simple way of looking at it, and it might seem very simplistic, but just think about how you breathe. What is enabling you to breathe? It's oxygen. Where does oxygen come from? It's the whole processes with the trees and the vegetation, all the exchange and all the rest of it that's given us oxygen to breathe. How do we live? We eat. Where does that food come from? It comes from a natural source. Doesn't matter which way you think about it. The water we drink, what is the origins of that? It's from nature. So I mean that those 3 fundamentals of life are all things that are directly, milk doesn't come from a bottle, if you know what I mean. Everything that we consume, everything that enables us to live is derived from nature. So nature is that mother life-giving force. So that is the first thing to remember, really, is that you're not separate or alone. You're not. You're just part of an enormous whole. And with that takes away feelings of isolation and loneliness, because none of us can actually be alone, because we are all connected. I like to describe it as it's almost like a braided stream that flows and it intermingles, but it's all part of one strand at the end of the day as the water runs down this braided stream. And that's us, and that's how we're all connected, and that's the pathways that connects all of us on earth. So really that's what the 7 principles of the line is all about, is don't feel isolated. I know it's very, very, very difficult, but if you go through these meditations, you'll feel, the most important thing to feel is to feel grounded, that you feel part of that earth, to reconnect as a being with that earth that surrounds us, and with the air that we breathe, and the water that we drink, and the food that we eat.
Could I take a moment to just share a sample of one of those now?
Please do, Denise.
So from chapter 1, after feeling and getting into a comfortable position, allowing all your stress to drain away, feel the calmness in your body. Still your mind. Breathe in slowly and steadily. Hold your breath for 2 seconds, then breathe out. Feel the stillness. Begin to feel grounded, anchored to the earth. Feel through the heaviness of your relaxed state, your connection to the earth, to divine nature. Once you're relaxed and your tension is drained away, tell yourself, I am with the divine. I am part of divine nature. I am not alone, but a part of, upon, and surrounded by the divine. And you would continue to repeat these words. Very beautiful. Very beautiful, Gareth.
Thank you. It's very simple, and yet in my own experience, I've seen how it has grounded people, and they feel part of a greater whole through that sort of thing.
So, Gareth, you've spent your whole life being close to nature. Right now, though, you live at the edge of the forest and you're connected to nature each day. Could you share a little bit about what your life is like now?
I think more than ever, I've never taken for granted at all the very privilege that I've had being in nature. If anything, today with the pandemic, it's even heightened my appreciation more than ever before. The wonder that I get of right in this little cabin that I live in, I get visited by a family of guinea fowl, which are like in the United States, I think you'd call them perhaps partridges or something like that. And they come and visit me, or the monkeys come and visit me. I've got leopards that are roaming literally on my doorstep here. And that is really amazing and fantastic. But I can be in a town, I can be on a book promotion in London and be surrounded by millions of people and all the rest of it. But if you can just break away to a little park and you just see a little gray squirrel or just the ducks or the geese on a pond or whatever, I get the same connection feeling there in a major international city or whatever as what I do here on the edge of a massive wilderness area and forest. It keeps you very humble. It keeps you in your place, and you can't overstep things when you're in awe, without sounding too fanciful. But you actually feel quite in awe and quite almost belittled by how wondrous it all is, that all this life is around us.
So you spend a great part of your day hiking in this wilderness area as part of your research. Could you share what that experience is like and how you feel connected to nature?
Well, I would be out, and it entails a lot of time on your own, and that's fantastic. I mean, when I came down to Knysna, this little town on the southern tip of South Africa back in 2001, partly because people were saying that in this wilderness area, there's only one last surviving Knysna elephant, and it's an old female elephant, and she's soon going to die. And that was the official story. And I came down here not to prove anyone wrong, but to see for myself. I came from a background, as you rightly said, with lions, but elephants have always been a big part of my life. So I set out as a research project to see for myself what is the status of these elusive and highly endangered elephants, what their status was. And I ended up, someone worked out over the years, within the first few years, I'd covered about 22,000 kilometers on foot, totally alone, on foot. I don't recommend, by the way, people walking alone. That was just the nature of my research, that I had to do it that way. And I was looked after. And so nothing happened to me. I was very careful as well. And I covered 22,000 kilometers. And someone worked out that that's like walking, I think it's about halfway around the world. All I knew is that I'd gone through 6 pairs of boots until this person came up with this. But I was totally alone. And over those years, it was walking is like a meditation. Particularly when you're alone or alone with your thoughts. And it was a very good few years because in that time I discovered, thankfully, that there wasn't just one elephant out there. I learned of various elephants out there. I discovered that there's a small breeding group that quietly, unaided by human beings, had just got on with things and had literally brought themselves from the brink. And that's another thing that I'm enormously grateful where I'm speaking to you from now, as the crow flies, the nearest I've had these, I'm looking down, to give you some sort of perspective, I'm looking down through a window in my little office, down to the Indian Ocean, and about 3 kilometers on the edge of the ocean. From here, I can see the little buildings of this little tourist town called Neisner. And people walking on that main street now, they would never imagine that only about 2-3 kilometers behind me in the north, there are these wild, free-ranging elephants. That's how close they are to the edge of town, but they keep to themselves, these enormous creatures. And that's a miracle on themselves, because I mean, the 90% of the elephants of this country were wiped out, you know, a couple of 100 years ago, but this tiny little population have hanged in there, and they're still existing. And that's a beautiful, another wonderful example of freedom. And freedom, you can't put a price on freedom. You really can't. And I learned that with my lions. There's no, every single day that something is free and has a free life, that is totally priceless, in the truest sense of priceless.
So you've spent almost 20 years in Neisner, and
Yeah.
yet you still find it fascinating. What?
Absolutely fascinating. And I can honestly tell you that every single time I go out there, I do not regard myself as an expert in any shape or form on this area at all, because every single time I go out, I discover something new, something that I've never seen before. Just yesterday, I came across some droppings of an antelope, and it had been disturbed, and I wondered what, and I discovered it was a small bird. It's actually pecking around it, which I didn't know that species utilize. It can be anything, discovering a plant that I've never seen. So this place, more than any other place that I think I've worked in Africa, is full of surprises. It's always new things, or a new bird species I've never seen here before. So constantly learning here. Constantly learning. You can never feel that you know it all here. There's just too much to learn. Like I said, every single time I go out, I see something new. So
important with
yeah,
people,
it's amazing.
It's important with people, no matter where they live, to be able to see the beauty in nature and see things with fresh eyes every day.
Yeah.
Now
Absolutely. I think that's so important. To open your eyes is so important. You know, to see beyond what you normally expect to see, and to try and see the unexpected. And then you'll see that the world is a much more fuller place than you could ever imagine.
You've also seen some pretty extraordinary things. When you were living in Botswana with your lions, the 3 that you rehabilitated, what were some of the connections that you made to the lions?
Oh, there's just too many to really tell here. I think one of them is it's really from, you can say, from the precepts, for example, of an extraordinary situation that happened, whereupon I was mother and father to these 3 lions, guiding them on life into the wild so that they can live as wild, free lions. But and people said I saved their life, because if I hadn't taken them on after George Adamson was murdered, they probably would have ended up in a lifetime of captivity. And that would have been awful. And to me, that would have been a fate worse than death for a wild animal, to be in captivity, because ironically, lions live for so long in captivity, up to 25 years. And yet in the wilds, they only live for about 12 to 14 years. But if they can live that 12 to 14 years, it's life of such quality compared to imprisonment of 25 years. So it's all quality of life. But telling the story very shortly, I was out with the lions one day, and they were about 1.5 to 2 years old. And so they were like teenagers. And they came across the footprints of a leopard. They started by scent, which surprised me, followed where this leopard went. Now, lions and leopards are great enemies, because they're both like apex predators at the top of the pyramid of life, so they're competing with each other. nature is beautiful, but it can also in our eyes be seen as cruel or harsh. But let me tell you, not as harsh as and cruel as what mankind can be sometimes. And they track this leopard, and lions will typically attack and kill leopards, and leopards will typically try and kill lion cubs, and it's because they're competing predators. So it's always this jostling with the two. Anyway, they came across this leopard, a big fight took place. I kept away to one side, and they were fighting this leopard, and at one stage I thought the leopard was mortally injured. And I saw that one of the lionesses, Ferrara, had been very badly scratched on her face. And I was up on a riverbank, and the leopard was lying on its back. And like I said, I thought mortally injured. And I called to Ferrara, and she came up to me, and I gave her water, and she drank from my hand, my cut hand. And then as I did this, the leopard saw me for the first time, spun around, and it just came straight for me. It was about 25 yards away or so, and it came straight for me, 20 yards. And in the time that it took me to rise to my feet, I just remember this, it was right there in front of me, still coming, and I just remember this golden shadow going over and above me and down, and Ferrara hit into smashed into the leopard and pulled it away from me. So there's the situation of the lions saved my life. Seeing me as part of the pride, they literally saved my life that day. That leopard would have killed me. So that showed incredible fellowship amongst us. They would have done that Ferrara would have done that for her brother Batian or for her sister. And so me being part of the pride, she saved my life. So that showed our unity and our fellowship and willingness to care, all the things actually that I can actually put in this, the courage, the loyalty. I mean, there's the precepts already and just in one story. But on a lighter note, a lovely little moment in the wilds when they're still getting used to hunting for themselves, and they're about a year old. And because I'm taller than them in the sense that they're more horizontal and I'm vertical, and I could spot prey species far off from them. And so if I came across a herd of impala and they're walking next to me, they learned whenever I crouched down, they knew that I'd seen something. And on this one occasion, I crouched because I saw these impala antelope in front of me, and I crouched down, and both lionesses, Ferrara and her sister Rafiki, they went off. Lions have incredible pincer movements that they go off to hunt with. And Batian, I don't know if it's a boy thing or what, but he was a little bit slow to take the hint of what was going on. And I literally had to, he was just looking around, his sisters have gone off and they're hidden and camouflaged, and he's looking around not seeing anything. And I literally, as I was bending down, I had to take his head and actually point it in the direction of the impala. And then the moment he saw them, he was awake and he got into hunting mode, and off he went as well. It's special moments like that. You know, I could go on and on. They led me to their newborn cubs. They used me as a babysitter to look after their cubs. With the death of Batian, they led their babies, their cubs, down to his grave. All this sort of magical thing which showed the unity between us, with us.
Absolutely beautiful moments. It's very clear that you establish a sense of purpose in your life. And for you, it's just naturally been working with environmental issues. But can you talk a little bit about why purpose is so important in life?
I think purpose is so important because and it's something that we all have, and that's something we must all realize that we do have. We are not here by accident. We all have got a role to play, just like I was explaining about the lions and their role in a pride or whatever. Everyone has got a purpose. Otherwise, if we didn't have a purpose, then life would be purposeless. And life isn't purposeless. Everyone can make a difference in the smallest way to the biggest way or whatever. Take the most inspiring stories. They're normally from, people from very, very humble beginnings who have made a difference in this world. It's normally those sort of people who do make a difference in the world. And we can take inspiration from all sorts of people and all sorts of things in this life. So I have no hesitation in saying that everyone certainly does have a purpose, and we must just be open to it, be open to our purpose in life. And you will find it, and it will find you.
So perhaps it's helpful for people to, when they're feeling in the depths of despair right now, to take the focus off of themselves and choose an issue to support.
Or choose themselves, even not even taking it to the extent of people. I mean, that would be fantastic and great and whatever. But one of the best things that you can give to is to yourself, and that can be introspection in a very, very positive way, and say to yourself, life was so terribly busy and all the rest of it, and we're all trying to earn a living, and life is just whizzing by and all the rest of it. But I mean, ironically, what this pandemic has given us is time for introspection, and think to yourself, what would I really like to do to further myself? And there's people out there who've learned new languages or have done free courses online or whatever it may be. And that is fantastic, because you're nurturing and you're feeding yourself, and you need to do that. I mean, we are like trees. We do need to be nurtured and, to get those roots firmly in place. So, with all the negatives that come with this time, there is the positives, that it allows us to be introspective in a very positive way, and to think, how can I nurture myself during this time? And people are doing it. They really are.
And you, on the surface, live a very simple life. You live in a cabin at the edge of the forest, in pretty relative isolation. Do you feel that simplicity in life is helpful?
I really do think so. People might imagine that, over the years that, because I've written so many books and so many different editions, that I'm a wealthy person materially, but I'm not at all. In fact, the opposite, because everything that I've really earned through my books, I've plowed into other projects, because I'm an independent. I like to have that independence, not being dictated by other people's dictation, how they dictate or whatever. So I've self-funded my work over these years, and that hasn't been easy. But it's also been there's been a very good side to that, because I've been able to be independent. But in terms of simple things, your appreciation level of, let me put it, of things generally are enormous. They really are. I mean, in terms of preparing yourself a simple meal. I mean, I live in this tiny little cabin. I feel as if I live in a palace in other people's eyes, if you know what I mean. I mean, there was a time when I was living with the lions for 4 or 5 years. There was, in the camp that I lived, there was no running water. The toilet was what we call a long drop, which is just a hole in the ground. The shower was just like this plastic sack or bucket that you pull up and fill up with water and you pour on you. There was no electricity. So, I mean, the fact that I'm living in this little cabin here, that I can turn on a tap and there's running water, instead of me having to get into a vehicle and go and fill up 40-gallon drums of water from the nearest camp, which is miles away, or to make a phone call back in those days without, cell phones, mobiles, or whatever, I'd have to drive an hour and a half. I've got, even though I'm living such a simplistic life here, I feel like a king, to be absolutely honest. I'm really happy with my lot, so to speak, here.
And I'm sure many people are learning to live with less of the luxuries that we've been used to because of the pandemic. especially even just luxuries of going out to eat.
Yeah.
Could, let's talk a little bit about the anger and loss that many people are experiencing right now.
Mm.
Not being able to see loved ones, losing jobs. For many people, it's the loss of their whole livelihoods. And what are some strategies that you feel are useful in letting go of anger? Let's first begin by you sharing some of the times in your life that you were experiencing horrific anger.
I felt horrific anger in various phases of my life. The three lions that I've been speaking about, they were nothing less than my children. I was, like I said, the mother and father. Now, to people, that might sound a bit strange. How can I feel that way? But I literally was teaching them. I was seeing them through life. It's like a human childhood, but condensed. So you have the infant stage, the juvenile stage, the infant stage, and then like growing into the sub-adults, and then they're becoming teenagers, and what comes with that, and establishing themselves. So it's almost like parallels with what a human parent goes through. And I saw that. And with the lions, it's about a 3-year period, crammed from birth to young adulthood, if you want to call it that, or coming into adulthood. So all the things that humans experience during that, or human parent experience, what you've got to give, what you've got to sacrifice with your children, that was very much what I was experiencing with the lions. And one thing with the human parent and what I experienced as well is the love that you give and the love that you receive. So when you've got these three children, and and then by the hand of man, Batian, this magnificent young male lion, he then gets lured out. After surviving a terrible fight he had with two other lions, he lost his tail was bitten off, he was almost killed, and then he recovers from that. That was an inspiration on its own, is that self-healing that the lions have got. And we'll perhaps go into this a little bit further when it goes to healing. But he healed himself from that horrific, and then he was fending for himself again, and he was about to take over another pride. He was doing everything right, and then trophy hunters arrived. And then they lured him out of the safe area. They used a bait. They lured him out of the safe confines of the reserve with a donkey, and a trophy hunter from overseas shot him dead, shot Batian as a trophy. And so I lost a son. And then, as you said earlier, I lost Ferrara and various other, their offspring, unjustly accused of killing someone, which they didn't. And then I had to voluntarily, I had to leave the area for the remaining lioness's sake, that she can just continue there. It's better that I leave the area. So I forced myself into exile. I forced myself to have distance from her. And she went on to have more litters of cubs, and eventually she was a very old lioness, and she had reared all her cubs perfectly well, and she was an outstanding lioness. But I lost my children, and I don't think that there's a deeper grief than losing your children. And so therefore I became angry, because I could see what caused the death of my children, and it was people, and it was their greed, or their wrong way of thinking, or whatever, their egos. In the case of Batian, he was shot merely as a trophy, for to boost someone's ego. So I had a lot of anger, and I was venting that anger in various ways, but not for too long, because whether it's the pandemic, or whether it's the loss of a loved one, or whatever, anger is such a strange emotion, because it's self-destructive. And we must avoid, even though we're only human, so we get angry, but we mustn't let ourselves get tempted into the seduction almost of anger, because by us venting our anger, we feel as if we're almost relieving ourselves of our anger. But it isn't. It's a self-destructive cycle that we have. And you'll find that people will almost like wear anger as a medal on their chest. I'm an angry person. And you listen to people's retorts and all the rest of it and their negativity, because the anger is negative and it's very easy. Like I say, it's very easy to destroy something. It's not easy to build something or to create something, which is the opposite of anger. So I learned, and I mentioned in To Walk with Lions, when it came to anger, instead of feeling that anger, which was destroying me to a certain extent, I learned to let it go, in the sense that I would literally, in the meditation that's in the book, learn to throw light onto those people or that situation or that person that has created this anger on me, to throw that light, that white light, onto that person, that hoping that, because their anger and their actions is coming from something. You see how it's self-perpetuating. They killed Batian. This person killed Batian because of maybe some problem in his childhood, that he felt insufficient or whatever, his manhood or whatever. There's a problem there. It's always an action and a reaction with anger. And I just learned to, even to the person who killed Batian, throw light on that person, light of good, light of goodness, and to try and help them. And through that, to actually help myself. And I didn't have that bitterness and darkness of anger within me anymore. It doesn't come overnight, and it comes with practice added, but it's well worth doing it, as opposed to being consumed by anger. Anger is a very destructive emotion.
Are there any other experiences in your life where you had this intense kind of anger?
I think back then I learned to let go of it. So then when I'm only smiling now because it's it's a serious subject, but there's always a lighter side to a serious subject, in the sense that once I learned to let go of the anger of people who kill lions and all of this kind of thing, I exposed what we call canned lion hunting in South Africa, where it's a very sordid industry. Lions are being bred in captivity for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, the cubs are taken away from their mothers, and they're used in these places that call themselves sanctuaries, and you have international volunteers who go there, and they think by raising the cub that one day this cub's going to be returned to the wild. So it's fraud, basically. It's, you know, that cub is then going to be used for another tourist activity, which is so-called walking with lions. And when they grow too big for that, then they're put into the hunting industry or for breeding or whatever. And there's only about 2,500 wild, free living lions in the whole of South Africa. And yet we've got between 8,000 and 12,000 of these captive lions that are used for hunting and all the rest of it. And even in death, it's from the cradle to the grave, the cycle of captive lion in South Africa, from the cradle to the grave. And even when they're shot, their bones are exported to the East for so-called wine, medicinal wine or whatever. So it's a whole sort. So I exposed this back in the early 90s, and it's still carrying on. It's still being exposed to this day, and we've had successes. Most international airlines will not export trophies of the trophy hunters, which is fantastic. I think over 40 airlines, countries like Australia, France, hopefully soon United Kingdom, won't allow import. But it's been a long battle of over 2 decades. But like I said, before that, I pretty much learned to let go of my anger. But I then, through exposing all these things, a lot of anger came to me from the trophy hunters and from the hunting industry. And then I was getting death threats, and death threats came in all sorts of shapes and forms. Threats generally, there'd be legal intimidation, that I was going to be sued for thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever, for all sorts of reasons. But then the real death threats, you know, the messages that would arrive, or the emails or the faxes, or even more ominous when you answer your phone and all you can hear is someone loading a gun and firing it, or dry firing it, or a shot going off. And so much so that someone asked me to write a little bio for promotion of this new book, Beyond the Secret Elephants, and actually put a little passage in there that during that stage, because I was receiving so many death threats, that I became almost a connoisseur of death threats. And it really didn't worry me at all after a while, because at the end of the day, if someone wants to kill you, they will kill you. They're not going to threaten to kill you. So I learned to let go of death threats. But that was a long time ago. But last time I had a death threat was about 20 years ago, so that's fine.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
So healing.
Mm.
It's your belief that it best comes from within. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're getting to the stage now that I'm going to finish up talking about that final note in To Walk with Lions, aren't we?
We are.
Towards that. Okay, well, just before we do that, yes, very much with healing. I think it's, first of all, you see the most incredible healing within the animals. They have this ability to heal themselves. And I think through our so-called progression or whatever, or more of our distancing from our relationship with nature, we've actually lost a large part of our ability to self-heal. Now, those of us who have got companion animals or whatever, we can see, even without treatment or whatever, we can see our dog or our cat might be off color or whatever one day, and we're not too sure what's going, and then amazingly the next day it might be fine. I had seen astonishing things in lions, like I said, with Batian. I mean, he was almost killed by these two male lions, and I was told by the vet, this lion will never ever be able to hunt for himself. 6 weeks later, Batian was bringing down full-grown eland antelope, which are almost 6 foot at the shoulder and weigh close to a ton. That's how he managed to heal himself. He was incredible with that. But it's not reserved to Batian. It's lions and generally per se. I remember one day talking about elephants, for example, coming across this young elephant. So it would have been about 10, 12 years old. So just about sort of 2/3, not even 2/3 grown, 1/3 grown. But still quite large, and it didn't have a trunk. It didn't have a trunk because it had caught the top of its trunk in a poacher's wire snare. And it had fought this, it was cable wire, and it had fought this wire so much so that its entire trunk had come off. And I thought, you know, this is the most appalling situation. I mean, the most merciful thing we can do is to euthanize this elephant because it's just going to starve to death. And I left the herd on that day. And then I was starting to hear stories from the local people. They're saying, no, but we know this elephant, and we've seen other elephants actually breaking off branches and feeding it. And to a large extent, I believed it, because that's how exceptional elephants are. They are truly emotional animals. I mean, they literally mourn the death of their dead ones. They cry salt tears. Like, they're amazing animals. So it wasn't beyond my thoughts and possibilities that others could be feeding it, until one day I was out a few weeks later and I came across this same herd of elephants, and I saw this elephant, because I was thinking, how does it drink? You know, with no trunk, because they will suck water into the trunk and then into the mouth. How does it do this without a trunk? Until I saw for myself. And this was many years ago. And I saw this elephant then at a water hole go down onto its knees and literally drink water like a dog. So it was just like it would have done as a little baby elephant, because baby elephants don't understand the use of, they have to learn how to use that funny thing called a trunk. And before they master it, they will actually drink from their mouth, directly from the mouth. So this like teenage elephant or early teenage elephant was resorting to adapting rather to that, and the wound had healed up, and I would see that elephant from time to time, and over a period of many years I would see this elephant, and until when I finally left that area, and this elephant is, you know, years later, like 5-6 years later, perfectly healthy, doing really fine. I think even had a calf of its own. I mean, astonishing. So I mean, the animals are such inspiring when it comes to healing, and we are. I think first of all, we're all capable of enhancing the healing within ourselves, but also we also have the ability of healing other people. And the way that I do it, if I know of someone who is not well, and again, it's a very simple meditation and process. It's just calming oneself and just getting away from the noise, and then just closing one's eyes and breathing in and breathing out. And then naturally to me, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And then I can see literally an outline, as I'm seeing you, Felice, now. I can see that with my eyes closed. And then I see like a veil of white going on the outline of the person until it totally covers the person. And that's healing. That's healing coming down on that person. And I've done this many times, and I'm blessed that I've done it many times in the sense that I can do it, I wouldn't say without thinking, but it doesn't take, because I've done it so often, I can do it very quickly. It comes to me very quickly after my closing my eyes. I can see the person and I can see it coming down. And we can also use that same technique to heal ourselves. And just to, same thing, just visualize yourself. I just close my eyes now and I can see myself, believe it or not. And you see this almost like a white mist coming over yourself. And that is healing. And then I think perhaps now I should tell that extraordinary encounter at the end of To Walk with Lions, or a little bit later.
Yeah, before we end that, I just want you to share a little bit about what you've learned about courage that can help people navigate their way through this right now.
I think really with courage is to almost think of oneself, again, it's an inspiration of the lions. I could think back again with Batian, you know, his enormous courage that by all means he should have been killed and all the rest of it, but it's that will. With courage comes willingness to live and to persevere. And it's all interlinked again with the other precepts, like having purpose and seeing that through and believing that anything is absolutely possible, and just digging very, very deep within yourself. And it's self-belief, and that's not always easy, but just having that belief and having that we're all capable of anything. I mean, look at me. I mean, I was this mixed up kid who grew up in the wilds in Africa. I was thrown into boarding school in Britain, which I knew nothing about it, in foreign surrounds. My education went downhill. I had eating disorders and all the rest of it, because I was like a hopeless case, because I was totally disconnected to my environment. I was like living on another planet. I was used to the African wilds. I was thrown into this alien environment, but somehow I managed to get on top of it. And that again goes back to, you know, having that sense of purpose. And so that is your anchor. When it comes to courage, the anchor is purpose. That if you really do believe it, everyone has got a purpose, but when you firmly believe in yourself, you've got that purpose, then you've got the courage. Sounds cliche, but you've got the courage to overcome absolutely anything. Mm-hmm. The sky's the limit.
And you have a story to share of a young boy who was able to overcome a very, very serious illness because of reading some of your work. Could you share that?
I will, and it's an extraordinary story. So I wrote this book, To Walk with Lions, about the 7 precepts, and basically the galley proofs had been at the publishers. I'd basically been given by my editor the final proofs before it goes off to the printers, and then I was asked to, and during those days, I was asked to travel to another town to do a fundraising event for people with special needs, to raise for adults with special needs. And I was going to give a talk, and it was a fundraising, like I said, it's a fundraising evening. And just prior to meet, I was still outside. It was like a town hall or whatever, and people were milling around. And then this lady came up with a copy of my very first book, which was called Cry for the Lions. And it was a book that I wrote as a young game ranger when I studied lions for the very first time in Botswana. And that was back in the mid-1980s. And I'd studied this population. I got to know these lions very well. Cry for the Lions. And this lady came up to me and she said to me, and I saw her approaching the book, and I thought, oh, well, that's fantastic. You know, she probably wants me to sign her book or whatever. And she came up to me, and that's what she said. She says, Gareth, would you mind signing this book for me? And I said, no, not at all. And then she sort of paused, and she says, this book has enormous significance to me as a mother. Can I tell you the story? And I said, yes, of course. And then she recounted how a couple of years previously, her son had a horrendous car accident, which rendered him in hospital in a very deep coma, And they would go there every day to talk to him, play music, try all sorts of stimulus to try and get him to work him out of this coma. But if anything, he was just staying in that same state. He wasn't making any progress. And so this lady, the book had come out, I think a few years previously or whatever it was, quite a few years previously actually. And she started reading this book of mine, Cry for the Lions, which is telling the story of these wild lions in Botswana and their ups and downs of lives and adventures, all that sort of thing. And they found that over the days that he became more sort of he came out of the coma increasingly more and more and more, and he was showing signs and movement and all this kind of thing until he came totally out of the coma, and that was miraculous. But even more extraordinary, I think, was the very first words that he said when he came out of the coma was he turned to his mother or turned to one side and he said, what happened to the lions? So he had been listening to the whole thing and had been captured by the story of these lions. And there, I mean, I would have never imagined that a book that I'd written and the story could have aided someone coming out of the coma state.
Truly the healing powers of nature. That's very beautiful, Gareth. Well, if anyone is interested in reading To Walk with Lions, which I highly recommend, it is available online as an ebook called Lessons from the Lions, as well as all of Gareth's other books. So if you're so inspired, I think you'll find a lot more insight in those books. And Gareth, I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Denise.
I'm sure your words have been very inspirational to many during these very difficult times. So it's been a pleasure, and we look forward to continuing reading about your amazing environmental work, and I know you're going to do more great things in the future.
Thanks very much, Denise. It's been great. Thank you.